ask you to take seats, please? We would like to start these days of co-creation.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nicholas Brook, and I wanted to welcome everybody today. So we are introducing the 2 days here, and we will start with Magda Schlebus from IFPIA. She has been a driving force behind Paradigm and other patient engagement projects. She's a driving force of IMI, and she's also a driving force of the co-creation process that we are putting together today and starting today. So Magda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm super happy to be here and to be one of the three to open this patient engagement open forum. It's very important because that we are the three of us here and that you are so many here in this room because it takes a village to raise a child, as you know, and I think we are all in that situation. So why do I make the parallel? And bear with me. While you are taking the seats, I think this story would flow. In order to raise a child, you need a village, and some of you may not remember that because you are living in big cities where the village is not raising a child, but in those times where a village was raising a child, you had everyone keeping a loving eye on a child, providing tools and providing direction to the child, not only their parents, but their families, their friends, their neighbors. It was true also for praising good behaviors, spotting bad behaviors, and correcting mistakes. It took a village to raise a child. And I think with patient engagement is the same process, and it takes a community to create patient engagement. There is a very big parallel of that. We need to keep a constant attention and a loving eye on patient engagement for it to be a reality. We need to have the tools, but most importantly, give those tools to those who need that in order for patient engagement to become a reality. We need to praise good behaviors, measure, but we also need to say when things don't work. So it takes a community to make patient engagement. Today, we would like to launch a process of co-creation. Well, actually not to launch, but continue. Because when Paradigm started some months ago, it has started on the premises of collaboration and co-creation. It's not just a group of companies and people who are creating something to give it to the others to use. It is about co-creating tools together with the community. Because what we need to do is just beyond ticking boxes and tools, it is about changing the culture. So when it takes a village to raise a child, is because it is about creating a new person, it is about creating a new culture. And what we try to do with patient engagement is to make sure that we really change the culture, that patient engagement is part of our everyday practice, that we have the tools, but also that we use them in our everyday practice. So today and tomorrow, what we would like to encourage you is first to close your laptops, to close your telephones, and to take a step in this co-creation process. You are invited to create together with us the tools that you would be using tomorrow to make patient engagement a reality. Let's keep an eye on the prize. The prize is culture change. We need to create that culture change. That's what we would like to do together with you. When FPIA took the decision to actually implement a patient engagement strategy, we decided to make it a reality, not just box ticking and patient engagement in our mission statement. We decided to make it a reality. And this is the reason why we engaged in Paradigm, why we are collaborating with UPATI and continue collaborating with PFMD. Because the other thing is that we need many people to implement patient engagement. We would like to create together with you the tools that anyone can take and run with in order to make patient engagement a reality. So, in summary, please help us today and please help yourself to create and co-create everything that we need to make patient engagement the new culture of research development and of the biomedical work. Thank you. And in turn now, I would like to introduce Matthew May, who is from UPATI.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and it was lovely to hear Magda kick things off from Paradigm. We heard that it takes a village to raise a child. We also heard about the tools that that village has. And I just want also all of us to quickly reflect on the fact that although we say we're at the start of a new journey of co-creation here today, a continuing journey of co-creation, we have actually seen an awful lot of success in the last decade in terms of patient engagement. We've seen various frameworks come into existence. We've seen guidances be developed, whether they're at the topmost level on the principles of patient engagement, the quality that we can have or the quality that we can see. The tools that we need to do the jobs are also slowly coming out there. We see, and we're going to hear more of that today from some of the work on fair market value, some of the work in contracting. Slowly, all these pieces of the puzzle are coming together. And we've had the various educational streams happening now for over, 6-7 years in the patient community, at the community level, but also across different therapeutic areas and across the borders that are slowly now spilling out of Europe, where I'm quite happy to say we have really started that movement, and we see it continuing now throughout the world. As we move forward, though, we need to consider that we've built some of the pieces of our puzzle. There are still many, many more to be done. If we look across everyone here today, we don't just have the 3 initiatives of Paradigm, PFMD, and UPATI in the room. The whole intention was to bring together a wider community because we're all working on different pieces of that puzzle. Fortunately, as things started in a very empty space, we could all choose the pieces that we worked on ourselves relatively independently and make great advances forward for the wider community. But now, as we've added more and more pieces, we need to make sure that we're aligning with each other. We need to make sure that we're complementing with each other. We need to make sure that we don't duplicate, that we don't waste resources, because there are very few, or shall we say scarce resources, available to us in the area of patient engagement. So we need to make every single euro count, every single hour that we're working on this count for everything that we do. With that, we started last year with the first forum of Paradigm. And I remember sitting with Nicholas, and we talked about PFMD and we talked about UPATI and the work that we were working on and the work that we wanted to achieve. And a few people from the audience raised the point already then of how are we aligning. And we also heard that message, and we have started to align. And I can say we are aligned. And I know that that isn't always clear to other people. Maybe the waters look a little muddied, that we might not be aligned at times. I can honestly say we are aligned. We need to find perhaps a better way of communicating that. But we're also not the only 2 initiatives in this field. We have all of the different other ones. Many of them are going to be presenting different workshops here today. And we need to align as much with them as with each other. And today is so important, which is why we also co-organize an event like this, that we need to open lines of communication. We need to open lines of collaboration. And we need to also keep critiquing each other, keep challenging each other to make each other's engagement and outputs better and better and take everything to a new level. So with that, I'll actually like to introduce Nicholas as our final speaker of the opening. As many of you know him, he's the Executive Director of Patient-Focused Medicines Development and from the Synergist. And really, for me, it was PFMD has managed to take what we've seen in Europe in patient engagement and really push it out at a global level, which has been really, really important in bringing together all the different pieces in terms of connecting people together. And so for that, we also have a lot to thank for now being able to have such an opportunity where we can know who we need to connect in a forum like this.
Thank you, Matthew. So it's a quite special moment for me to be here. We are at Synergist and PFMD. We believe that we have to change the whole system, and actually to be sitting here with Magda and Matthew, and they've developed already how we collaborate and how we look at it as a whole system that nobody could change on its own, and how we align at the European and global level to make that happen. It's the kind of, there's a milestone moment here for the next 2 days, and I want to develop a little bit on that. So I think, and I'm not the only one believing that, but patient engagement is at a turning point. So the tools are there. We have some massive movement by key stakeholder groups. So we also see that the practices itself are progressing day by day. So the people that are reviewing as part of PFMD or as part of Paradigm the good practices, they can see the evolution from where we were 5 years ago and where we are today. So there is already at the individual level, in silos, there is progress. There are also more and more initiatives that try to turn this progress into something replicable, frameworks, methodologies, processes. And so we see more and more of them. So we also have these key stakeholders moving bold steps. We have several companies in the room here that have decided to train any single person on patient engagement in their organization. And not only they do that, but they make the training available so the entire industry globally can benefit for free about that training. So I think that's quite some bold movements, and that's why I think we are at a turning point for patient engagement. Several people believe we have reached the early majority of adoption of patient engagement. We have done a long way to get there, and there is still a long way to make meaningful patient engagement systematic. Now, what about the 2 days? And I believe it's an opportunity, and a big opportunity. So if we succeed at the end of the 2 days, actually we don't simply tick a box. We don't just present shiny case, forgetting the less shiny part of the case study. We actually discuss about it and we learn about it. We meet again and we continue. It's not a one-off meeting. Actually, this forum is something that can continue, and I'll come back to that. And so we build an asset for patient engagement. So it's not a one-off conference. It's an asset where we can continue to meet and keep address together what are the pending challenges and obstacles we face. So concretely, for all of you, for the next 2 days, it's an opportunity to look at the good practices and to learn from them, to try to think, okay, if I try to bring that in my organization, what will work, what will not work? How can we turn that into a methodology? It's an opportunity to identify gaps and to start shaping projects and solutions for that. It's an opportunity to work on what I think are the most existing robust piece of work already. So you will hear on fair market value, measurements, gaps, legal contracts, what is the result of a lot of co-creation already. And actually, I intend to demonstrate during the 2 days that some of the work come from 4 or 5 initiatives in Europe, feeding an initiative in the US and bringing that back in Europe. All of that not only working together, but also allowing a fine-tuning and better evolution of the whole set of tools, methodology, and processes, which if we move at one, and that's what we are trying to do now, if we move at one, actually it's a much more efficient solution. It's much more easy to adopt what we are doing, and it's much more easy to actually spread that across the different actors and stakeholders of the health systems. So we will have, I think, for the next 2 days, we will have the opportunity, a unique opportunity. Someone was telling me earlier today that it's unique. Where, in which industry, even in health, where do you have a platform with a multi-stakeholder meetings for with 250 people that are actually meeting to work together and work on solutions with people from the US, from Europe, from all stakeholder groups. So I think it's pretty unique. And so just to finish on the village, it takes a village to raise a child. Actually, for the next 2 days and moving forward from now on, you are the village. And so it's up to you to make it a success and to raise that child. Thank you very much. I think we can now move on to the actual sessions. Thank you, Mathieu.
Exactly. Now it's time to actually go and co-create. Break off into the different groups. Oh, no, matches, nope. Nicola's next up. My apologies. Head of the program. I'm too eager.
Could I invite my panelists to come to the floor, please? Thank you. Is Sabine in the room? Wonderful. we're settling down, good afternoon from my side. My name is Nicola Bedlington. I'm from the European Patients Forum, and it's a real pleasure also to welcome you to today's open forum on behalf of being co-lead of Paradigm, also being co-lead of UPATI, and being a board member of PFMD. I think that the previous speakers really reiterated how we're working very, very hard in sync, in synergy, to move forward on patient engagement. I'm really excited about the opportunities of today and tomorrow. I'm also delighted to chair this panel session today. I think everybody in the room is aware of the potential of patient engagement in the HTA and regulatory space in the life cycle of medicines. And I think that today we're able to actually talk to a number of esteemed panelists to get their perspective on where they are in their own environments and where they would like to actually go. I think it's worth noting that the Paradigm is actually focusing on collaboration with HTA and regulators as one of the key decision points that we're actually unpacking in a great deal of depth, the whole area of early dialogue with patients, industry, regulators, and the HTA experts. But today's session will actually look with the panelists to see what their expectations are of the open forum, what's happening in their own fields, and where that is actually evolving, and where they see the future of patient engagement. I'd like to make this session as interactive as it can be within the short period of time that we've got. So while we're talking to the panelists in the first instance, please think about any questions, comments, reflections that you might have. And to maximise the time that we have for discussion, I will actually introduce each of the panelists as I pose a question to them. So I won't introduce them all at the beginning. We'll do it one by one in time. But thank you in advance for joining us. It's great that you're all here. I'd like to start actually with Nathalie Bere from the European Medicines Agency, the European EMA. And Nathalie, you've been working with the agency for over 20 years, and you've been really dedicated to creating opportunities for patient involvement within a whole range of activities within the agency to make sure that there really is a strong patient's voice. So tell us in your own words how you see patient engagement within the European Medicines Agency and perhaps where you see it going as we move forward.
Sure, thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. I think we've talked about how everything has changed over the last decade, and I've really seen that within the EMA. I've seen the change across the years, and I think now we're at a point where the value of patient input really has been demonstrated, and it's no longer a question of why or if. It really is, okay, so when and who and how are these patients coming in? So I think it's no longer that kind of question, and I think it's been about working together with the patient groups to make sure that the way we are engaging with them is mutually beneficial and that everybody is supported throughout and they can understand what their role is. Obviously, the better everybody in a given situation is prepared and they know what their role is, they can give better information, and it's a kind of win-win situation. So I think it's great to see that this is now an integrated part of the EMA work. Obviously, there's still a long way to go. I think it's important as well not always to be striving for more, increasing, expanding. I think we also have to sit sometimes and take stock. We've all said that, after the last decade or whatever, we've increased. Let's see what has worked well, what can we build on, and then where are those gaps? So I think from the EMA side, we've tested lots of methodologies, so patients can be involved in various different ways, whether it's face-to-face meetings, surveys, committee members, etc. But I think it's about making sure that, firstly, we choose the right methodology for the right activity. Sometimes a particular activity lends well to a small, in-depth discussion with one or two patients, where you can really ask spontaneous questions and get into the details. Other times, you really need to have a wider community perspective, so perhaps it's better to do a survey with several hundred patients. So I think it's matching the activity with then the methodology that you use, and that methodology has been created together. So moving forward, I think we need to make sure that we are more systematic in involving patients. They are involved across the medicine life cycle as we talk, but there are still gaps. We need to further look at where they are not involved yet, and then how can we involve them? And again, doing this with everyone. And this is right through from pre-submission as well. It's working with companies as well to let them know what kind of patient data we want to receive and to encourage that they include this in their submissions as well. And then for us further down the line, further involving them. And I think the challenges are not only becoming systematic, but also obviously resources for everyone. I think outreach is also another one. I think we need to also make sure we reach those patients that aren't perhaps connected like all of us are. So I think that's also important. And representation. I think we need to make sure that when we do have these discussions that they are representative as much as possible. I'll stop there.
Super, thanks. Just a couple of additional pieces. The FDA and EMA, there has been some collaboration over the last few years in relation to patient engagement. Perhaps you could say a few words about that and where you see that going.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, obviously being the two largest regulators from US and Europe, we do collaborate together, and we have a special patient engagement cluster. So we have quarterly teleconferences, and then we liaise closely with the patient engagement colleagues over in the FDA. I actually spent 2 weeks over there, and the colleagues spent 2 weeks with us. And we really found that a lot of the challenges were very similar, even though we work in different cultures, different ways. And so we shared respective experiences. There's actually a paper coming out next month explaining a bit how we've had this collaboration together, and we have gone away each learning from each other, and there have been some tangible changes, which has been great. And this will carry on forward, the regular exchanges, to learn what we as we experience, to share that experience.
Great. And your expectations for today and tomorrow, this open forum, what would you like to see coming away with?
I mean, personally, I think it's a great opportunity to see where everyone else is, and again, about learning from each other. We don't each need to, I think it was mentioned earlier as well, we don't need to do these things in silo. It's let's all work together and benefit for those who've already worked in certain areas to gather their knowledge and then share together. So for me, it's about listening and learning and sharing if it helps as well.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Nathalie. So let's move now to a national context. It's a pleasure to welcome Dan O'Connor from the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA. And Daniel's background is in cancer research and oncology, and you've been with the MHRA since 2006, also very active within the European Medicines Agency as the UK representative of the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products, the COMP. So Daniel, tell us a little bit about your environment and what you've seen achieved over the last few years and where you see the journey going.
Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's amazing to see so many people interested in patient engagement. So I've been a regulator for nearly 13 years, and time flies, but I really have seen and witnessed actually patient engagement really evolve in such an incredible way over those last few years, particularly the last 5 years. When I joined COMP in 2010, I was really impressed that our deputy chair of COMP was a patient representative. It really meant a lot, I think, and it really provided much more of a connection between the regulators that often don't practice anymore, either clinically or in other healthcare professional areas, that you can really still see that patients are very much involved in our work. And there are other committees as well as the European Medicines Agency that the member states contribute to, that we really see the patients really coming through. We've got the Patients and Consumer Working Group, but some of the other committees are also really trailblazing patient engagement. We're also seeing increasingly, I think, over the last few years, more patient centricity in terms of the clinical trial development, and that includes developing a patient-reported outcome measure in oncology particularly, but also in other specific therapeutic areas. And also increasingly we're seeing patients coming to the European Medicines Agency to contribute to scientific advice. So we have scientific advice meetings through the Scientific Advice Working Party, and these patient representatives are really valued for their opinion on both sides of the table. So I think the sides from the industry, but also the sides from the regulators and the others in the room, to really understand better what does the patient want from that particular product, how feasible is that clinical trial design, how should that clinical trial really be conducted, and what are the important endpoints and the objectives for those patients. So moving to a national perspective, so member states contribute to the European system, but we also have our own regulatory authorities. Recently, we've experienced a couple of ad hoc patient groups where we had patients come to the agency to help us with some tricky benefit-risk decisions. And we really recognised in those meetings the importance of patient engagement, but I think we also saw the challenges of trying to put together those ad hoc groups. How do you select the patients, the logistics of bringing patients into the agency? Actually, the time that you need to set up these meetings, you have to be much more responsive in terms of ensuring that patients have what they need. We have a patient consultative forum with over 100 different members of patients, and we're increasingly using this forum to really understand better from our patient membership what they want from us. And I think we've understood through the consultation with the forum that we really need to understand better how patients want to engage with regulators, how they do it, but also what's important to them. When do they really want to engage with us? And on that line, we've got a consultation that's open now, public consultation to really try and understand better the engagement from patients, and it's open till October the 7th. So I'd really encourage anyone interested to go on our website and really sign up to that. So I think in summary, regulators have really moved forward with the patient engagement initiatives that are going on. But I think one of the things that still is outstanding is really how we should engage patients and when patients really want to add their value to the work that we do as regulators. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. And similar to the question I posed to Nathalie, what are your expectations for the next couple of days?
I think everyone's going to say learn, but I think I've understood that it's a really nice collaborative environment, and I think really I'm hoping to take home some messages to my agency back at home that I can feed into our patient engagement team about some of the aspects that we really want to really try and move forward to ensure that patient engagement is truly embedded in the work that we do.
Great, thank you. So let's now move to Spain. It's my pleasure to introduce Sandra Garcia Armesto, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Health Sciences in Aragon in Spain, and previously worked at OECD as a health economist and policy analyst. So Sandra, set the scene for us. How's patient engagement happening with your within your agency? Is there an appetite for further progress? Are you also, like Nathalie mentioned, taking stock? How does it look from where you're sitting?
Definitely there's an appetite for that there. And I really love the way Magda channeled today's discussion and the forum going, because it's totally true. It takes a village to build it. To educate the child, to build what we need now. And in our case, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's enough. If I turn you hear me, right? Anyway, the point is, what I was trying to raise is that actually there's, beyond all the issues that my colleagues have already taken to the table, I wouldn't reiterate on that. I think we are all sharing the same kind of issues. I would like to highlight particularly in this forum, some needs that health technology assessment agencies or bodies, some needs that we have. And I hope that this forum, I come from the end, I hope this forum will help us and enlighten us on this respect. Bear with me. The thing is that we need to play our role in the village, right? So we need to be able to actually make patient engagement happen. And most of the efforts that we have been putting forward so far was in understanding what were the needs, what were the expectations of the patients, of course. It's a given. We want patients there. So let's make sure we have the tools, and let's make sure we find a framework for patients to get in effectively, comfortably, and usefully. However, something that I think we have overseen, right, is we actually need to educate ourselves. The institutional framework that we work in, and most of us have been scientists for years, or regulators, or it's a totally different world, right? And even in those most progressive institutions, and I'm thinking our Anglo-Saxons friends, that accountability is a must, but we all have different cultural frameworks, so we can say that even in those environments totally familiar and friendly to accountability, there's an issue about, getting the lay voice. And, not getting it as ticking a box, but as an expert, how we conceptualize the expert advice that we need from the patients. And I don't know if you would agree with me, but I think if we are totally honest, it's still challenging. I mean, because beyond our total agreement on nobody knows about what is an actual outcome, good outcome. Nobody knows that better than the patients. It's actually very difficult for us to combine it with the other things that we need to take into account. And the appetite for that is there, and in our case, I mean, in Spain, we are a quasi-federal country, so actually we have a network of agencies working for the whole national health system, right? And we have been doing this work for at least 10 years, like, you know, making sure we develop materials to train. Our first step was kind of, let's make sure that there's nothing coming out without shared decision-making tools, right? So we want to have those materials, and we want those materials, sorry, I'm backing. And we want those materials to be made by the users, co-creation, right? Okay, and a step further is we want to have their opinions on how we should select the evidence that is going to inform that. We want to have them part of the committees, but actually they are not very made to be in the committees. What we find out, I'm relating the story, the evolution. It seems that it's too overwhelming, and that sometimes most of the times the kind of discussions we are having, they find it are not relevant. We are not talking about the right things. However, they are not able to point out for the rest of the experts what's the relevant thing. So there's a language thing. So we have been moving along those lines. We have been elaborating manuals and guidelines for ourselves as health technology assessment body for Spain, for ourselves to be able to incorporate, to deal with the fact that we need patients. And I wouldn't say we have gone like really far along the line. I mean, there's plenty of work to be done. But I come to my first statement. One thing that we have discovered is that it is not only about making conditions comfortable and amicable for patients. What we have realized is that we need to make the same effort for our technical staff to actually be able to behave properly in these circumstances. And that's where we are. I mean, that's how far we have gone there. Of course, I mean, you have heard from my colleagues, we also have the European effort going on, UNETA, and I'm sure my colleague will also illustrate that. We are using everything available, and that's why EUPATI, the PMFD paradigm is certainly a place where we want to be, with whom we want to collaborate, and we are using any framework available and possible. But the level has moved, I must say, because as psychologists used to say, realizing the problem is one of the first steps in recovery. So I think we are getting there, but I would say it's really work in progress with a lot of appetite.
Thank you for your very frank overview. That was really, really helpful. So last but not least, I'd like to move to Sabine Ettinger, who is a research and scientific project manager in UNETA and is co-leading the work package that focuses specifically on joint assessment. Sabine is also part of a specific UNETA task group on involvement of patients, consumers and healthcare providers. So a couple of questions for you, Sabine. What are the methods for patient involvement in UNETA assessments, and what are the changes you've experienced so far in the work that you've been investing in over the last few years?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the kind invitation. I am project manager in UNETA, responsible for the European assessments in other technologies. So other technologies means non-pharmaceutical technologies, medical devices, screening programs, or other interventions. So I'm not an expert in medicines development, so this is a quick disclaimer. But with regard to patient involvement, what we've created so far in UNETA is that the patient involvement methods are the same for pharmaceutical assessments and other technology assessments. So that's why I'm happy to provide an overview to you today. So I'm part of this patient and consumer and healthcare provider task group in UNETA that was created at the beginning of Joint Action 3, since we've realized that there is a need to further develop methods, because in Joint Action 2 we had a lot of issues with involving patients. One of them was because there were no preferred methods available, or weren't actually clear to us how we should involve them. So that's why this group was set up. A lot of different work package members are part of it. And we've created 4 methods that we are now testing in UNETA. One is the open call for patient input. That means that we're using the HTA patient input template that is being put on the UNETA website and can also be sent via email. And then we obviously inform patient organizations that this call is online, because otherwise we cannot expect that everyone is checking our website regularly. So then the patient organizations are asked to provide a synthesized view of individual patients. And then the other method is one-on-one conversation, where one of the assessment team members is having a phone call with an individual patient. And really this is the chance to get to in-depth questions. And then a summary of this conversation is being made and then sent to the patient for validation. And then there is the group conversation, which is usually done only in specific cases, because it's requiring a lot of efforts on both sides, because people are coming together and discuss face-to-face on the issues with their diseases and experiences with the technology or expectations towards new technologies. And this is then also being summarized and being sent to the participants for validation. And then we have the e-meeting with patient representatives or patients, where the assessment team can discuss with the patient on specifics with regard to the PICO, the population intervention comparators and outcomes. And really the focus of our methods is to have the involvement of the patients in the scoping phase, so at the very beginning, so that really the input can be fed into the PICO, and that we've missed a patient-relevant outcome, or we weren't aware of any other important outcomes. So that's why it's really important to have them at the very beginning involved.
Okay, thank you. And again, a similar question. You're here, you've come along to this meeting. What are your expectations for the open forum over the next couple of days?
So my expectation is also to learn from the other projects, because I'm obviously only involved in UNETA. So it's really interesting to hear about Paradigm and all the other efforts that are going on, so that we can learn from each other and really exchange experiences, because we've had a lot of issues also with identification of patients. So how do we find them? How do we get the patient organizations actually to participate? Because it happened a few times already that we've contacted patient organizations and then they even did not reply at all, or they said they don't have any resources and they weren't willing to participate. So I think it's really, really helpful for us also to get some input with regard to this.
Thank you, Sabine. I'd now like to open it up to the audience, to the participants, to see if there are any questions or any comments on what you've heard so far from our 4 panelists. I think there's a microphone coming to you. Just bear with us a second. Thank you. If you'd like to just introduce yourself very, very briefly before you pose the question or make a comment.
Hi, my name is Melissa. I'm representing Lundbeck. Thank you all for a great panel discussion. To the comments you were just making about the UNETA one-to-one conversations with patients, what is the selection criteria for your conversations with individuals? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. That's a very good one. Because we, for the individual patients, we asked them to fill in a DOICO form. This is a declaration of conflict of interest and confidentiality undertaking. So they need to fill it in, and we only accept patients that are free of conflict of interest, which is mainly focusing on financial conflict of interest. And the other criteria are set up by the assessment teams, because they are selecting the patients based on the PICO, on the disease and the intervention that they are going to assess.
Any other questions? Oh, we have a few here in the front of the... Paul, I think you put your hand up first.
Paul Robinson from MSD. The analogy of the village, I think, is going to get a little bit tired by tomorrow, but
So don't mention it, Paul.
I'll keep it going for now. In every village, there have to be rules as well, and to some extent, the people on the panel reflect the rule makers as far as we in industry are concerned. So, do you see any virtue in mandating, or at least expecting, patient engagement in the dossiers and the meetings that we have with you?
If we can take a couple of questions and then we'll sort of group those. I think, yes, please.
Hi, Kimberly Kalsenberger, Ingelheim. I had a question for Nathalie, and it's similar to this one. So you mentioned you would also like to work with companies to let them know what the EMA would expect in the future, what we submit with the dossiers, and how would this collaboration look like? Should we set up individual meetings? Would there be a guidance document that you're working on?
Can we just take a couple? Sorry.
I'm Christophe Poinsilly from Niemann Pick, Swiss. And I would like to say that in all the progress we are doing, regulators are not always helping. We are an ultra-rare disease, and we have to fight against some rules of the regulators to make some progress. And what I like very much is what you say, there should be no conflict of interest. And this is actually, in my view, only the patients have no conflict of interest.
Thank you for that contribution. The last question, then we'll go back to the panel. Matthew?
Good afternoon. Patient engagement surely is common sense. You don't go to the doctor and say, I don't feel well, and say no more. If you've got a problem with your big toe, you tell him it's your big toe. So you need to get patient engagement to open. You need patients to open up and encourage the engagement. But you also need to manage it, because if you have 3 million people suddenly volunteering information, how are you going to manage it? Which leads me to something I've been saying or advocating for the last 6 years. There ought to be a survey of 10, 15, 20,000 people possibly, with 300 or 400 questions. But you don't expect all those questions to be answered in one go. They need to be broken down into periods of one's life. Before you're born.
Sorry, we have really limited time. Could we come to either the question or ultimate comment?
So really, you need a lot of people and you need to manage it.
Okay, super.
And how are you going to manage it?
Thank you very much for that. Very relevant question as well. So can I invite the panel to give some reflection on the questions that we've got so far? There's one specific one for Nathalie, we'll kick off with you, but really a lot about making patient engagement mandatory and the whole management of patient engagement, and perhaps the need for some sort of large-scale population study and unpacking that through the life course, essentially. We'll kick off with you, Nathalie, and then comments from the rest of the panel afterwards.
Thank you. Yes, so I think it was the questions around providing advice to companies, because, I mean, we are working on a paper. It's still early days, kind of similar to the one the FDA obviously released quite recently, which also provides guidance to industry. I mean, I think as well, there's still a lot growing in the area in terms of methodology, which is sort of recognized and robust. And I think until we get to a point where it is so understood and determined and qualified, etc., I think it's difficult for us to give precise guidance. So we have been working on a document, and actually the document is still draft because it's still quite high level. And in a way, personally, I'm reluctant to put this out because it just says, we encourage you to collect patient data. We promise, so this is from the regulator, we promise we will look at it, we will take it into account during the assessment, but we're not yet at a point where we can be so prescriptive to say, this particular data is acceptable, this particular one isn't, this particular methodology or this way you have to use to collect the data. So we are very aware that, you know, it's a bit like a catch-22. You know, obviously I understand that for you guys, you want to have better guidance to do the studies, to give it to us, to know that it will be at least looked at and valuable. For us as well, we're not quite there yet anywhere to be able to be prescriptive. So I think just to say that it is coming. You know, I think as well, if you can provide information to us, so when you advance in this area, you know, whether it's if you come for scientific advice, if it's maybe a qualification on a new methodology, or if it's just to share with us what you've learned in using patient engagement methodology, that as well helps us all advance. So hopefully that gives some light.
Thank you, Nathalie.
I'll take the first and the last question because I think they in a way answered each other, because you said, should patient engagement be mandatory? But I think the gentleman over there said, but it's obvious we should be including patients in engagement. And I think when something's obvious, why haven't we been doing it? And we haven't been doing it for many, many reasons. And I think the reasons are that we need to learn more about where patients can really be placed within the regulatory system. And I think we're starting to get much better idea of that. I think you hit on a really important point about resource, and we often talk about resource from patient groups, but actually all parts of the system need to be appropriately resourced. And I think as a regulatory agency, that's something we've really started to recognize, that when we held these two patient groups, we realized how much resource we needed to be able to pay patients to come, to ensure the transport was there, that when we had wheelchair users coming in, that all of the normal parts of the committee meetings were all acceptable. So I think resource and managing expectations are something that I think are really key. But part of today, I think, is learning about where we are at and where we can really move forward, and how much resource do we need to really implement some of these really exciting initiatives that are coming on.
Sandra?
Just to elaborate a bit more on what you were saying, because I totally agree. Part of it is a question of allocating resources. And I will come back to my previous approach, which is we normally think a lot, like the regular budgeting and the regular business as usual. We, of course, have committees all the time, right? And we are really made to have, experts in the field coming over or online or whatever, having the discussions again and again and again. I mean, we all know the process. The thing is that until we consider that having the expert input of the patients is equivalent and it becomes normal, and we are, that's an until, because there's a long way there from our organizations and also from the patient side, because the process is not clear enough, it takes more resources, as we all know. But the point I'm trying to make is that when we are considering it's an extra effort, it's only because it's not mandatory. Because otherwise we wouldn't be considering it's an extra effort, because if you need to set up, we are seeing it for clinical practice guidelines. You know, it's mandatory almost everywhere. When you are preparing the clinical practice guidelines, you need to have your patient's input. So it's considered all the time. So you have the process already there and the budget already there, and it's business as usual. So I think it's a question of time and methodology, I do agree, and finding the optimal point for the input to actually make a change. But
come in, Nathalie, yes,
Sorry,
please.
just to add add one thing kind of onto what you're saying as well, and in terms of resources as well, I think we also need to make sure that we do get that patient data where it's most needed.
Yeah.
Like prioritize, you know, I think there's, and this is again moving away from the tick box, let's do it when it matters for everyone, because everyone's time is valuable, you know, patients as well, they're busy as well, so I think it's about prioritizing and
Thank you. Sabine, what are your thoughts?
So from practical experience within UNETA, it is often that for HTA assessments, that national bodies often they weren't sure about which methods to use or how to include the input then in the assessment. So I think it's often they don't do it because they don't feel comfortable or they don't have the required knowledge actually to do it. So I think for UNETA this is a great opportunity to really have the patient involvement and then really capacity building also on national level, so that the HTA bodies then really know what to do on national level. So so I think that's really a great opportunity. And even us at LBI-HTA, we're also now starting to we are highly interested in doing the patient involvement in national assessments as well. And we've learned also from UNETA, because when we were authoring, we also involved patients. So I think it's really to get the knowledge to everyone. And also in UNETA, we're working on a guidance document on which should guide the HTA bodies on how to use the input in the assessments and how to make it visible. So really that.
Thank you, Sabine. Any further burning questions from the back?
Hi.
Oh, Dan wants to say a quick word before we invite further questions.
I don't think we addressed the gentleman's comment on the ultra-rare.
I saw that more of a comment rather than a question, but if you've got something to add on that, that's fine.
I just think it would be helpful to understand what the problems were.
Yeah.
Maybe that can be taken offline. But
Yes.
I think the new clinical trial regulation specifically says that rare and ultra-rare conditions should be fostered by member states.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be that when that's implemented, that might be something that can really help people in those situations, that there is more focus from member states, particularly from clinical trial approval, to assist with ultra-rare conditions.
Important point. So
Hi, I'm
Yes.
Claire Nolan from the Charities Research Involvement Group in the UK. Thanks for a really interesting panel discussion, and thank you to Paul for the question on mandating patient engagement. I wasn't daring to ask it because I think it's a question that Nathalie probably gets quite often, but a really relevant question all the same. So you were talking there, Nathalie, about definitely not wanting to mandate, but offering that guidance, but not being ready to be specific about the kind of guidance you were giving. So for me, it's not about being specific about the guidance, but it's setting out more a policy position of support, in just making it very, very clear that EMA supports industry to be involving people affected by health conditions in their research programs. And so I'm thinking of the example of ABPI, who very clearly started to understand that their code of practice was a barrier to patient engagement. And so for me, over the last few years, ABPI have taken huge steps, not in mandating or saying specifically what companies need to do, but very much being clear about their position in that they think that companies should be involving patients, and by no means using the code of practice as a reason not to do that. And so I just wanted to say, for me, it's much more about just setting out a clear statement that the EMA very much supports companies to be engaging with patients in this way, rather than worrying about being too specific about the guidance. That's my comment.
Thank you. A couple of questions at the back, very far back.
I'm Hilary Doxford, and I have a diagnosis of dementia. I was a former member of the Alzheimer Europe working group of people with dementia, and I co-founded a similar group in the UK. And I'd just like to emphasise the gentleman's point about resourcing patient groups. There seems to be a huge expectation that we can just deliver the engagement you're looking for without any costs involved. We often have to ask for our expenses to be covered, and if we ever mention a fee for gaining our knowledge, people often walk away, and it seems like we're the only people in the room that are expected to give everything and pay for that privilege, which we recognise as a privilege and we enjoy it. But I've got one other question.
Yeah.
regarding patient engagement, how representative do you feel that the patients you're engaging with are of the people they are supposedly representing? With dementia, it's a particular problem because I can still talk. The majority of people with dementia aren't able to. So how do you accommodate possible shortcomings in the group you're actually engaging with? I hope I've made myself clear.
Thank you, very clear, thank you. We'll take one more question from the back and then we'll regroup some of the answers from the panellists. If you can be brief in your question because time is racing. Can we take the one at the back and then we'll come to you? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dominique Hammerlink. I'm a UPATI fellow and do all sorts of stuff as patient. Listening to the discussion, my question is, if industry is not hurrying up in engaging patients, we will get that in the end medication and devices will come onto the market that isn't fit for purpose from the patients. So we're sort of, if the pipeline doesn't start at the beginning, when will, and I think it will be sooner than everybody is expecting, we will have a complete disjoint acceptance of medication and devices that have nothing to do with, or nothing is exaggerated, to do with what patients needs and wants.
So do you have a specific question for
the question is, how are we going to avoid this? The HTA is in the end, the regulator is in the end. If we don't start in the beginning, how do we avoid that this will happen?
Clear, good. And the last question before I take it back to the panel.
Hello, my name is Anders Lassen. I'm from Lundbeck. Thank you so much for the frank discussion. A question on the knowledge sharing. So there was a comment that it could all be best at sharing the good experiences, especially when it comes to sort of the data methodologies around this for purposes of decision making. So I think there's a good point to reflect further on that. And my question to the regulators is, are there sort of considerations on making that more transparent on your side as well? For example, in terms of review documents, e-pass, lay summaries, on sort of showcasing when patient input has done a difference.
Okay, so we've got a nice variety of questions for you to get your teeth into. The issue of clear guidance about the receptiveness of the regulators for patient input, how representative are the patient communities that are actually advising regulators and the HTA community, the need for early involvement and not just relying on end-of-pipe involvement of patients, because that can have severe consequences on the quality of medicines at the end of the day. And then the idea of showcasing examples of excellence where patient engagement has really happened very well. That's a sort of summary, a very clumsy summary of the questions at hand. And can I invite you to perhaps grasp one or two that resonate most with you? Nathalie, please.
Just so if I just run through them quickly. I mean, I think the early point about compensating patients is very true, and I think that it's true. Patients work so much on a voluntary basis, and I think they should be compensated for the work that they are providing, even though EMA doesn't compensate beyond travel and accommodation expenses because we don't have the basis to do so. We are working on it, but that is where we really rely and appreciate really the voluntary way that people work with us. And then I think the only thing we can do to give back a bit is just to make sure that it's as easy as possible to really prepare and do as much as we can to assist you when you do come in and get involved, so that it doesn't take that minimal time. In terms of representation, it's a really good question as well, and I think it's a really difficult one to always be able to say, yes, we are fully representative of any given community, and I think you never ever can be fully representative. I think you have to try and be as representative as you can, and especially when you have the rare diseases. And I think it's about networking, and this is where we rely a lot on the patient organizations, because you are the ones that have the outreach with those patients, and you can give us that feedback from the wider community. And again, it's about using different methodologies. Surveys sent out now using social media can reach a lot of patients, so you can get that wider input. And I think the other point about showcasing, I mean, definitely I think we need to work more on explaining better how patient data has been included, what impact that had on the assessment, so that it shows the importance and the value and that other people can see it as well, not only for those that are involved, but as an example moving forward.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, just briefly touch on a couple of the comments. I think ensuring patient representation is really important, but ensuring that is truly representational of the group of patients that you're seeing is a challenge, and I think we rely very much on the patient experts to ensure that when we're canvassing our patient consultative forum that we are getting the right sort of spread. I think involving the patient right at the beginning is absolutely key, and I think that comes from the scientific advice, so the scientific advice meetings where we're increasingly seeing from the European Medicines Agency year on year, more patients are engaging with the regulators and industry, so we're getting those comments right at the very beginning about these pivotal clinical trials. And again, I think showcasing is something that we haven't done very well, and I think we have a couple of examples in the UK where we had one of our early access to medicine scheme medicines where we had to have a benefit risk view, and we took patients into one of our expert committees, and very much the patients provided really key information on the unmet medical need about using this medicine, and that is in the public domain. But I think we can do better in terms of ensuring that where the patient voice has added value, that we are communicating that appropriately.
Thank you. Sandra?
Well, just to try to be a bit original and supporting everything that has already been done. Well, I think we really need to be very precise between what we mean by representative, right? And maybe it's my non-native English speaker background, but we are thinking that we need expert input from a person that have the actual, from a group of people, from individuals that have the actual experience that would be affected for the development of whatever device, medicine, whatever you want. We are not thinking about advocates. We are thinking about the actual carrier of the experience, and needs to represent no one but himself, herself, and her peers. And I don't know to what extent that's always floating there, so just to clear the air, and again, just not to say exactly the same things. And the other thing is, again, I would like to be a bit provocative, if you bear with me. I don't know why we need to showcase the value of having patient experts, because we have never ever showcased the value of having neurologist experts. And I don't know, if we all... No, I don't want... I wasn't fishing for that. That's not what I'm trying to do. It's an honest reflection. It's an honest reflection. I put it forward at the beginning. We actually agree that there's expertise we need to put into our processes, so actually we have more useful, more meaningful, more innovative, more needs meeting developments, medicines, devices, whatever. So we all agree on that, but apparently we need to prove the value of patient engagement. And it's not the value, because I have been a scientist most of my life. I totally understand and relate to the concept of we need to prove the value of the methodologies we are using to extract and use this expertise. But whenever we are saying, and I hear a lot from the companies that really, to be honest, concerns me, because it seems that either there's some added value and that has to do with legitimate profit, or let's forget about this because actually, we wouldn't bother. And I don't know why we need to prove that. We need to prove the methodologies, we need to prove the frameworks, because I think the basic consensus on we need this input is already there. So I really would like to hear all of us rephrasing it differently.
Okay, food for thought for the next day and a half. Sabine, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll be quick. So thanks, Sandra, for explaining that with the individual patients, because we see it similarly in UNETA. We also want to have the input from the real patient, from the individual patient. And with regards to reimbursement is that this in UNETA is depending on the national requirements, so the institutions that involve the patients, they follow the national rules, but we say that travel costs or other reimbursement, like accommodation, should be reimbursed. And just to make a comment on behalf of my colleagues at UNETA for Early Dialogues, just to outline that, because there was the question that patients should be involved from the early beginnings, that UNETA involves patients also in the early dialogues with a scientific advice with EMA.
Thank you. While you still have metaphorically the floor, I'd like to, we're coming towards the end of the session, but I just wanted to invite the panelists to sort of look into a crystal ball and think about where we might be in 5 years' time. Where would you like to see patient engagement in 5 years' time? Presumably a little bit beyond UNETA. Sabine, what would be your vision? Just in a nutshell, in a couple of sentences.
So for me, I think it would be good in that every institution really is, that it's clear for them that patient input is very valuable and needed, and that we have all the necessary tools and the knowledge to really include this input, and that it really then has the required input.
Thank you. Sandra?
My wishful thinking for 5 years' time, that we have better agreement on the exact points at which we want patient input, and we have succeeded in proving, comparing, and testing all the tools available, and we are fine-tuning.
Thank you. Dan?
I think based on our consultation, I hope in 5 years we'll better understand what the patient needs are and where they want to interact us as an organisation, and that we will have developed a framework that represents those requests.
Gosh,
No pressure.
Yeah, I think just that there are no more gaps, and that every medicine, when it gets to the market, has included the input and views of patients, and even post-marketing as well.
Thank you. So I'd like us to thank the panelists. I think we've had a really interesting discussion. I had wanted to look at the perspective of the regulators and the HTA representatives on the panel, in terms of how they see the wider landscape from their lens, and time hasn't permitted us to actually delve into that. I'm sure that will come up during the course of the discussions over the next day and a half, but that's something to think about, because there's a wealth of experience here as well. I think the discussion itself has actually pinpointed some of the inhibitors, some of the drivers, some of the opportunities, and some of the ambition that we have out there as well. So please join me in thanking our panelists very much for their insights. And I'd now like to give the floor to Mathieu, who's going to give us a little bit of logistical information on how the rest of the afternoon will work. Mathieu, the floor is yours.
So you've been listening a lot. Some of you may have asked questions. It's time to work, okay, to roll up the sleeves, I like to say. So this is happening now in the interactive session. So we have 3 parallel interactive sessions happening in 15 minutes, and this is why we give 15 minutes for people to move around. So I know you all have checked the website, patientengagementopenforum.org, so you know exactly what you're interested in. Yet I'm going to give you a bit of story. So what is happening here, okay, right after? It's learning from good patient engagement practices and applying to your everyday work, okay? And during this session, you will be able to work with these presenters, so the folks who are moderating the session, to explore how the learning might be relevant for you, and how to take a case study and turn it into something that is applicable to your everyday work. What a program. This is happening here. The session number 2, it's legal contracts between patient, pharma, and researchers, where we are and what is currently missing. Okay? So this is happening in room to creativity. And my colleague, Adriana, she is waving here. She's going to lead you to the room, okay? If you want to know more about legal contracts, where we are, what is missing, co-creation happening between different organizations, this is Adriana, and that's going to be on first floor. All good for now? Good. Session number 3 is going to be understanding and prioritizing gaps in patient engagement practices and process. So participants will bring their collective expertise to influence and inform the co-prioritization and refinement of identified gap in practices and process in patient engagement. Okay? This is going to happen in the room on the first floor when we passed the reception of the hotel, and my colleague Susanna, which is now raising the flag, higher, yes, and she's going to lead you there. Okay, so it's straight on the corridor. So again, if you want to know more about the framework and the different practices and how you address that to your daily job, you stay here. If you want to know more about legal contract, you go to the first floor. If you want to know more what are the gaps and to help the community to prioritize them, you go on the first floor at the end of the corridor. You have 15 minutes.